Hello everyone, in this episode we'll be looking at strategies for self-reflection and keeping yourself honest with assessing your progress and readjusting your creative plan. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the initial questionnaire that you completed before this program, and at about the 6-week mark, which is where we are now, we'll show you strategies for reassessing your current position based on your outputs and creative practices up until now. We're going to see this week how important it is to keep diligent records, and we touched on that in week 1. However, this week we're really going to see, I believe, the first practical example of how important that can be. And don't feel bad if you didn't keep notes for the first 6 weeks. You can take these practices from today and apply them to your creative practices beyond. A key component to self-reflection is being honest with yourself. And it's very important to be honest with yourself in reflection, because I believe that it's easier to hear something critical from yourself than an external party. And if you are to hear that same trait that you would identify by yourself with honest self-reflection or through someone else, you're more willing to action and take positive action towards addressing that reflection. Whereas I find in my past, if I've had criticisms or observations thrown at me from an external, I am more prone to be more emotional in receiving them. And that can sometimes impact my desire to be consistent in a negative way. Now, we are prone to be our largest critics as creators, so it's very important that we do lace in some intentional kindness in there as well. And that's where in our first few videos we've been talking about the importance of just rewarding or acknowledging yourself in engaging in consistency. And now we start to see that we do look at a little bit of the output in terms of how to self-reflect in what you've actually been producing, and making sure that we are moving towards an end goal. A second thing that's very important, and coupled with your brutal honesty to yourself, is an awareness of your own personal traits. And for an example, I in my past have had a tendency to become overwhelmed very easily, and this was pointed out to me from an external source once upon a time. The reasons of whatever I used to become overwhelmed, not really relevant in this conversation. However, it's important to look at the practice that I was in type of a yes mode, where if I was presented with an action or a task or an opportunity, instead of really assessing whether it was going to progress my mission or progress my vision, I would almost reactively just say yes and start acting on it. This was in creative spheres as well as professional spheres and social spheres. But it's very important to be aware of your own traits, in the sense that by establishing my own boundaries, which is the first part, and then practicing them is the second and much more difficult part, I was able to reduce the ways that I became overwhelmed and focus on practicing my creativity, which is really where I wanted my lifestyle to be aimed towards, on a more consistent level. And the third thing with brutal honesty for yourself and the awareness of your traits is realizing that what you're engaged in is really a journey, and that if you ever lose consistency throughout this process, that it's very achievable to get back on the horse, so to speak, and to restart and gather that snowball once again to roll down the hill. And hopefully this time we can gather some momentum from that rolling. And if you remember back a few weeks ago in a previous video, I talked about the process of starting a creative habit as getting together a snowball and rolling it down the hill. And an extension of that analogy is that sometimes you can think that you've done enough preparation on your core to begin the creative process with enough momentum to complete, when actually you can start to roll and all of it falls apart. This isn't a process to feel discouraged by, but rather something that should prompt you to go back to the top of your hill and start gathering another snowball, making it stronger with lessons from the past one. So it's a combination of these three things: honesty and awareness of self, and realizing you're engaged in a process, that really are imperative to your self-reflection journey. In today's video, we're going to look specifically at the Gibbs model of reflection. Now, the Gibbs model is something that I was introduced to initially doing my diploma of education. However, it's something that I've been able to keep with me and apply in almost all areas of habit building and behavior management. It's also helped me really assess my actions and interactions and make sure that I am presenting myself and refining myself to be the best type of version that I can be. And that's across, again, all my different spheres. I practice that in my social sphere, professional, and creative spheres as well. The Gibbs model helps you reflect after an experience or interaction and can be a useful model for breaking down the specifics or smaller components of a larger experience so you can draw the specific components that you need to address in more detail or develop. As you can see here, the Gibbs model starts with a description of the situation, the feelings around that situation, an evaluation of the opportunity, an analysis, conclusion, and an action plan around that specific experience. So applying the Gibbs reflective cycle to creativity, we might see that initial description as an ability to consistently output writing. So by this time you are sitting down in your 6 weeks and you've committed every single day for 15 minutes. However, you're still just stuck on reading about creativity or talking about creativity, and now you really want to take those practical steps to, well, what is stopping me from writing? I am a writer. We say it every week to ourselves. And so what is stopping me from actually producing? This is just an example again. What are our feelings around that? How do I feel about not being able to produce my output? Again, this is just a hypothetical situation and you can adjust it how you see fit. But really pulling in that emotional element that's tied to the experience helps us unpack the surface feelings, I guess, or reactions to that experience. Is there something larger or behind the scenes that is playing at me that is not or prohibiting me from being creative or having some creative output? And realistically, and pulling those feelings in and being real with them is a very important part. We remember with our honesty to identifying the true reflection of an experience. So in the evaluation component, we're looking at the pros and cons, the positives and negatives of the experience. So everything that went right, all the strengths that I can draw from that experience, and everything that went wrong. So perhaps again, we are having these fantastic readings, we're getting really inspired. However, every time we sit down in front of that blank page with the blinking cursor, it all falls away and we can't produce. There's something in that, and there's something really important to evaluate within yourself where that thorn is sitting and what is actually prohibiting you from moving forward. The evaluation again reveals to us the importance of clear planning at the beginning, and we can evaluate our experiences and reflections now based on where we were 6 weeks ago. And this benchmark is so important in reflection to draw that comparison. Otherwise, we can largely feel that we are just treading water, or we're sitting in the same space. And this can be positive and negative, and positive in the sense that it is a great way to maintain a positive emotion around creativity, is that people constantly engaging. The negative is that it can really produce a feeling of non-progression as well. And so it's incredibly important to be setting these milestones and reflecting on these milestones in a regular way. The next step is analysis. And analysis reflects on the evaluation, which is above the feeling, so above your emotion or in a deeper level. And the analysis looks at the things that you could have addressed to really raise those weaknesses. Now remember, if in this hypothetical situation you're having struggled to output, you love engaging, you love coming up with ideas. However, when it comes time to really engage and produce that writing, everything seems to fall away. So what practical steps can we put in place now that we have identified that, we've outlined our feelings of the description of the event? What practical steps can we outline that might be a good way forward to really bring up the things that we've identified in our analysis that didn't go the way we wanted in that experience? The conclusion step ties all this together. You're tying together your analysis of the evaluation of your feelings of the description of the experience. And that really gives you the solid one chunk that you're looking for in the type of one punch way of the experience. And that is that I am struggling to write because I'm not planning well enough in my writing. I am just having a spur of the moment idea and not putting in enough work to make sure I have a clear enough roadmap so that when I am sitting down to be consistent, I'm also working towards producing output. That might be a conclusion. Okay, so if we run with that conclusion into the final stage, which is our action plan, and the action plan is one kind of step above a conclusion where we're not just identifying the things we want to elevate our weaknesses, we're putting in the practical and viable steps of how we're actually going to achieve that. So it's a level above identification in the sense that we are clearly identifying to ourselves that we will increase our time spent planning, we will increase the amount of time we spend gathering our snowball at the top of that mountain to make it as strong as possible, so that when we do start with our creative output or rolling it down the hill, that we feel that momentum and that consistency. And that really is the key to that long-term success necessary to complete those projects. So how can we practice this self-reflection and creativity? Well, a very important way is self-questioning, and not to the point of overthinking where you're in self-doubt, but I guess being self-critical. And again, this is keeping in mind that with our brutal honesty, we're trying to be kind to ourselves as well. This creative journey that we're engaged in is very isolated. And when we show people our creativity, especially institutions, it's not very likely they're going to be kind or nice about it. So let them be the harsh critics. Is that when we're criticizing our own work, it's very important to lace it in with, again, those recognitions that for you to sit down and be even attempting this is in itself a massive achievement, and that should be recognized. And those things, I believe, keep the positive emotions high when practicing consistency. So some of the self-questioning that we can be practicing is, am I committed to my own consistency? Am I committed to myself? Am I committed to my project? Just 3 core questions like that. You can, again, spur off in a lot of different ways from those 3. But they're what I would identify as the 3 core progressional self-questions for creators. Something to be constantly reminding yourself that it brings you back to. One of those questions can identify other areas of your life that maybe are taking over from creativity, and can help you identify ways to type of calm them down so we can focus more on being creative. The second way we can be more reflective is experimenting with new ideas and new mediums as well. Is that if you are prone to short story writing, I'd really encourage you to write some poetry or even draw. But being creative in different elements can sometimes reveal things to our creative mind that were otherwise kept in the corner or sheltered. With our understanding of our own preferences, of how we like to do things, can sometimes really hinder a whole nother world of discovery by telling ourselves, no, I am a short story writer, no, I am a poet, and I only explore ideas through poetry. That's fine. But if you're experiencing any type of lull, then getting out and experimenting with new ideas or new mediums of creativity can be a fantastic kickstart to that creative momentum. Ways to be reflective in creativity is also networking with other creatives. At Hive Mind, we really try to preach an environment of collaboration, not competition when it comes to creativity. And this is something I see a lot in the creative environment, where there are people competing against each other in an environment that should be otherwise shared and collaborative, where the exchange of ideas is how we all are able to grow, and the exchange of experience in a collective is how we form an understanding of truth. And so a contribution of individual stories and experiences like the one you're writing right now are incredibly valuable to other creatives, and not just for their own content, but their own practices. Is that the way that you do things, by just doing them, you are either setting an example for another or showing another that you can learn as you go, which is incredibly important for other creatives to see. And this networking is really strong to keep you in check and keep your critical voice in check, making sure you don't become too overthinking or too negative on yourself as well. And all of this self-reflective practice is so that we can take small adjustments to our creative plan. Now, if you set a creative plan 6 weeks ago with us, you can really see how far you've deviated, or if you've maintained that, or if you've excelled over that. But by setting these benchmarks, like we said earlier, those things really become clear. And by doing that and keeping diligent notes and being honest with yourself and aware of your traits and your lifestyle ahead, you can readjust your plan so that you can better meet your consistency and in turn produce your creative outputs. Now, the way I think about this is a captain of a ship, and he knows that his destination is somewhere west. So locking the wheel into the west position does not account for the rough weather or the rocky waves that could deviate the boat away from its desired course. So we have to think about our creativity as a consistent journey in that same respect, is that life will throw a massive storm at us in various different ways. And I'm sure you're thinking about your specific way just as I say that. And it's not to belittle that or water it down by any means. It's just to simply adjust with it and roll with it and not let it capsize you and stop. The worst thing we can do for creative consistency is stop. So it's important that through the power of process of self-reflection, that we're able to confidently readjust our plan, not completely change it by any means, but readjust our plan so that we can have a better opportunity at achieving our overall goals. And finally, we encourage you to commit to yourself. The commitment to your plan is that when you set these expectations, they are meant to be just out of reach. You're meant to be setting your goals to a point that pushes you into discomfort and allows you to grow. It gives you the best opportunity to grow. We mustn't look at this process as continually changing plans and being extremely wishy-washy with our own expectations. We need to set them and then be extremely serious about meeting them. And if we don't do this, we'll go back to setting really outlandish and ambitious goals. And when we don't meet them after a certain period of time, those negative emotions will just let us surrender it altogether. And what we're about is developing creative consistency to help you complete your projects. So again, the practice of self-reflection really helps us remain true to ourselves and true to our goals. And what I mean by true to ourselves is true to our ability to output. We mentioned a situation before between two different creators, but if one creator has simply access to a lot more time than another, that they should each be adjusting their goals to reflect just that opportunity of access to time above any other circumstance, and that you should all be looking at the individual ways that you can incorporate creativity into your life, and a perfect time for reassessment is this 6-week point now. And we've given you again another questionnaire just to reassess that milestone, and you can compare it to the first one if you did that, or you can use this as your first one, and from now taking these practices beyond this point into the future of your creative journey.